you hit the nail on the head when you said if we haven't done it, we'll figure it out. It's hard sometimes. Like I was trying to find window cleaners and no one would answer, no one would respond. I'd email, I'd text, I'd call. And finally someone called back and they came out and they gave me a price. And I thought it was a little bit high, but I wasn't going to argue because no one else will call or respond. So here's the job, and had them do it. And I think that is key, because sometimes you need that fast response. You need someone to respond or acknowledge, and that's hard sometimes nowadays. Like people just will not pick up their phone or return a call or return an email. So I think that there's a lot of value there.
Welcome to the Real Estate Law Podcast. Jason Muth here with Pride Away Stays, straightforward short-term rentals. I am flying solo today. We kicked our attorney out the door, but we have an amazing guest. Oh, look at that, thumbs up. I love this person's story. I reached out to this guest on Instagram. You know, most guests that we have kind of come to us, but sometimes we go seek people out, and we sought this guest out. This is Tom Brickman, also known as the Frugal Gay. I love your story. I think it's an important story to keep telling. You've told it many times before. You are a real estate investor. You are a financial literacy coach. And your story is that you worked a W-2 job in places like The Gap and Old Navy and movie theaters. And you've been selling stuff on eBay to save up your dimes and nickels and pennies. And now you have this amazing real estate portfolio. I got to hear how this has actually all come together. But first of all, big welcome, Tom. Thank you so much for joining us.
I don't even know what to say after that introduction. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and share my story.
Thank you for allowing me to dive into your DMs as a Gen Xer. I'm not sure I'm saying that correctly. Slide into the DMs, right?
Slide in, yes.
So Tom, when did you transform and become the Frugal Gay?
I did that towards the 2021. So about 3 years ago, I knew that I was leaving my W-2, and I'm like, I'm going to just start sharing what I'm doing anyway. So I had been doing it for 15 years at that point, but I wanted to start publicly sharing and share my journey, because I also knew that I am one of those that likes to stay busy. And if I don't have something or sharing something or showing something to someone, I'm going to get bored real quick. And leaving that W-2 left a big gap in my schedule. So that was when I'm like, I'm going to start sharing this.
When was your first real estate investment that you made?
First one was at 21. I was in college. I was a senior in college at the University of Toledo. And when I went to go get qualified, I made like nothing at Old Navy and Gap. And they're like, you qualify for like a $40,000 house. They're like, but if you get a duplex, we can qualify you all the way up to 100. And I'm like, well, obviously I'm getting a duplex because I want something better. And I bought that first one at 21. I cashed in Gap stock as my down payment because I had no money saved. I was living paycheck to paycheck. And I brought out my dad and my grandma from Cleveland over to Toledo. And I had that one that I wanted, and I wanted them to look at two others just as comparables. And the one that I loved, they're both like, this is the worst house we've ever seen. What's wrong with you? And then I remember my grandma on my front porch. She's like, you're buying this one. Like, we went to this one that I didn't really care for. She's like, you're going to live in this one, and you're going to live in the small unit upstairs, and that downstairs unit is going to make you a lot of money. And I'm like, but it's ugly. She's like, you can make it nice. I've made them nice. You know, this is just grandma, and you don't mess with her. Yeah. So I bought that duplex, and that was 2004. So I'm actually right now about to hit my 20 years of owning that, and that's still in my portfolio.
Have you refinanced it, or same loan?
So no, I hated my first mortgage. It was like, I couldn't believe how terrible that bank was. So as soon as I actually made some real money, I immediately paid it off. And then I did cash it out maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And I used that money to buy I bought a commercial space with it. And that first lender I was so terrified after that first lender. And then the second loan that I got it the next year. It was like nothing. They're like, I remember I'm at the closing table and I'm signing applications and they're asking me questions. And this is like why the financial crisis happened. But when I went for the third one in 2000, I bought my third property in Dallas in 2009. I was like, it was night and day from that 2005
Oh yeah.
experience.
Yeah, that's back when they were giving loans to anybody, and they're like, if you were breathing and had a pen, you could sign it. Wow. So grandma, never leads us down the wrong path, right? She grabbed you by the collar and said, "You're living in this one. You're gonna fix up that one, and you're gonna make a lot of money." And she was right.
She was, but everyone started panic selling around me in 2009, 10, 11, and I bought it for 90,000 and the value fell to 45. And I'm like, I can't afford a short sale. I want to buy more houses. I'm just going to keep paying this. But it made, like, at that time, I think it was $1,000 and my payment was $738. So it was still making money. And that was my thought process. I'm like, well, I'm getting $1,000 in rent from the 2 units and I'm rent, I'm
Hmm.
still good. So I'm just going to keep paying it and hope that it goes back up. And I was the one that held out. And by 2015, it went back up to 90,000 and has continued to go up since. So I just kept making my payments. And that's always when people are like, but what if it falls? I'm like, don't sell it. Just keep, if you're making money on it, there's no need to run and sell it right away. And there's a lot of fear out there. And I think that's also why I've done well, because I've bought some duds along the way and I've held them just long enough or fixed them and sold them after time. And I think that's always been like, okay, it's not making money right now or it's not making sense right now, but hopefully within the next 3 years or that. And I've been successful with holding some of the stuff that because I've messed up along the way. I've bought
Hmm.
quite a few. I'm at 22 at this point with 23 under contract.
23 more under contract.
No, number 23 is under
Oh, number
contract.
three.
So one
Okay.
more.
All right. I'm like, wow, you're doubling. I'm fascinated as to how you figured this out so early on in your life. All right. A 21-year-old that's looking to buy real estate. When I was 21, and I went to a good college. I also worked at the Gap, as I mentioned beforehand. We were talking about some of our training, which we both remember. But I don't get how you figured this out. And I bet you all your friends didn't. All right. I certainly wasn't thinking about this when I was 21. I was thinking about the career path that I was going to be on, maybe going to grad school, but kind of really wanted to work in the media, which is what I ended up doing for over 20 years. And then following my pathway there, you somehow were working a retail job, which is a really standard job for a lot of people that are that age. But you saw beyond that and said, how am I going to start to build wealth with, this relatively low paying job? Wise beyond your years as an early 20-year-old. And in the gay world too, there's a lot of delayed adolescence. I don't know what you feel, but a lot of times people in their 30s live their 20s in their 30s, and they live their 40s, or they live their 30s in their 40s, et cetera, for a variety of reasons that I've talked about on other podcasts. But how did you figure this stuff out?
So I was in Ohio, which at that time it made more sense to buy than rent. And that's what I was frugal at that time. And actually when I bought the duplex, I was paying $375 for rent in like the hood of Toledo. But when I bought the duplex, the lady downstairs was paying 600 and I'm like, "Oh man, I can live for $138." So I was doing this very early where it was much cheaper to buy than to rent and I'm like, "Okay, and I can start building some equity in this." So that's why I had bought the duplex and then I bought a single family in 2005. And then I didn't know what house hacking was, but then when I bought the single family, I'm like, all right, I've got a roommate and he's paying me $500. And it just, for me, it was a money saving tactic, which I know that doesn't make sense. And trust me, I learned the first winter in Ohio when I had to replace a furnace and I didn't have $2,500 to replace that furnace, how expensive being a homeowner was. But I didn't want to pay rent. So I started buying and
Yeah.
that was how it kind of started.
I've reached a point in my real estate life where I'm legitimately putting in six generators right now, five in each of our rental properties, so one in each one and one in our primary home. And if you were to have asked me this question years ago, like, did you ever think you'd be spending the money on six generators all at the same time? I would have been like, first of all, I don't even know why I need a generator, but now I do. Second of all, I'd be like, are you insane? Like, how much money am I spending? But like, now I'm at the point that I have to do it. And it makes sense to do it financially, both from an investment perspective and a cash flow perspective, because I know how to pay this off as well. Um, but holy moly, like we switch from being these, weird people trying to figure our lives out, working these retail and movie theater and lower level jobs to suddenly being adults and having families and relationships and all this real estate. And it happens really fast, but gradually over time. I can't explain it, but I even think 10 years ago, like I would have never thought that I would have had the portfolio that I have today. But once you kind of start accumulating, and you accumulated throughout your 20s and 30s, getting that 23rd property, it's an awesome thing, right? But like you're like, oh, it's just my 23rd. My 24th is coming up soon, right? That's kind of probably what your mindset is.
For sure. And I did have fun along the way, but by the time I was in like 2010, I knew that I didn't want to job hop to another company. I knew that I could actually make money doing this because I started making money when I got to door number 5. And I try and stress that to people. I really made nothing those first couple years besides just scraping by and making it work and putting roofs and putting windows on. And then when I got to 5, I remember that was the first year that I'm like, I think I actually made money this year. This is the first. And then when I actually made that money, I'm like, all right, maybe I can do one or two of these a year because this is 2010 and everything's like being given away because people are panic selling. And I could actually do this instead of going to a job or being stuck in this job or going to another company where I'm going to have the same issues that I'm having at this company. And that's when I like started reading into financial independence and all the options that are out there. And that's when I like made it a point. Like I was buying at least one a year since 2010. And I was buying, when I started in Dallas, I kept getting outbid, outbid, outbid. And my realtor at the time, she was like 80. She's like, you need to look at what everyone else is ignoring. And I started buying condos because they were so cheap. They were like, she's like, get your foot in the door with a condo. And I started with a $14,000 condo and just kind of went from there. And she was right. And those $14,000 condos now are $250,000 condos and have great rents and great tenants. And, she pointed me the right direction without, and people are like, why would you do condos? Well, that's all I could afford. And that's all the investors ignored. So that's what I did. And I didn't just do traditional. I went to the courthouse steps and I bought a condo. I did a lot of that stuff then like an idiot. And I showed up in cargo shorts with $10,000 in my pocket. Like I didn't know what I was doing and flip flops. I remember all the investors were looking at me as I'm bidding on this one. Like I was crazy, but I had paid a title company to do a title search and I'm bidding and I'm shaking as I'm bidding and I won it for $9,501. And when I handed the money to the lady, she's like, seriously, this is $9,501? I'm like, yeah. I didn't know you could bring cashier's checks. Like I didn't know any of that. I was just there bidding like an idiot to win another condo. Um, so I took a lot of those chances. That was everything I had too. That was like every penny I had in that cargo pocket. Um,
Wow.
and I won that condo that day.
One of the lessons there is listen to the older ladies as well. If you had like between grandma and your agent.
She'd been around for so long. Like she also was getting listings from this one certain bank, and she's like, hey, I'm about to list this one. And it was always a little bit high. Like, and I look at these prices that she was telling me. I found a notebook when I was moving last year and I saw all these prices of these houses that I was looking at in 2011, and it like crushed me because they were like $18,000 and now they're 400,000.
Wow.
And I couldn't buy them back. I could buy one a year, and that's
Hmm.
always what my focus was, to get one or two. There in 2013, I did end up buying 3 that year. Um, so yeah, that was my beginnings, and those were my influences. And I also leaned in on the resources that I had. So the first place that I bought, I had a guy come who worked at the movie theater and did maintenance. And I'm like, all right, I have $400. What can we do with $400? And he's like, well, I could fix this or I could do this, and that was how I started, was using the resources that I had.
So you figured out house hacking before it was a term, right? Before
A
house hacking
a hundred
became
percent.
something that everyone was talking about on Bigger Pockets, about 10 years ago in markets like Toledo, right? Like one
Mhm.
of those classic markets Bigger Pockets always used to talk about. You seem to figure out the FIRE movement, if you're a proponent of that, the financially independent retire early movement, early along the way. I only learned about this a number of years ago, right? But you're talking about saying, hey, if I could do this house hacking thing and it leads into, buying more real estate and renting this out, I can kind of not have to work these other jobs earlier in my life. Like, so I don't know if you're a follower of the FIRE movement, but you certainly are speaking what they say. And you did it probably even before that was even a thing.
it was a thing, but it was still very new. And I'll just tell you a real quick story. I had met there was this couple that I started following in before 2010 who was traveling the world, hit fire. They were in their 40s at the time. And when I finally was leaving my job, I finally had the courage to like contact them and say they inspired me and all this. And I got like a one-line response back from the guy. He's like, "You're doing it at the worst time. You should just keep your job." And it was just so disheartening that I'm like, I still fall. It was just a rough interaction, but I still have respect for them because they motivated me for all those years.
Never meet your heroes, right?
Right. I learned that the hard way. When I got that, I remember reading it and I'm like, really? All these years of following you, and this is the one-line response that I get back? Okay. So,
Um,
anyways,
along the way, though, I mean, I want to talk a bit about the gay side of it too, because I'm sure you have some friends that you've interacted with, like in the LGBTQ plus community, like as we all do, as I do. But we never talk finances. Like money never comes up. And you and I were talking before we hit record about some of the other great podcasts out there. Queer Money is another one that both you and I have been on. And we've had those guys on a previous episode of the Real Estate Law podcast as well. And I think that their mission is fantastic. And I think they do a really good job with it. But there's just not a lot of them out there. People in our world seem to aspire to what we see online, which is probably not different from the straight world. But to get there, they're stretching themselves thin with how they're affording the lavish lifestyles that we all see on our phones. That don't involve places like Toledo; they involve places like Mykonos, right? So,
right.
no disrespect to Toledo. Um, how did you reconcile that with your friend group where they saw what you were doing and they were like, I don't know what you're doing and I don't get why you're doing it. Like, what was that conversation like?
Because they saw when I actually started to make money and how freeing it was to not have the credit card debt and that they had. And they started, I have like one of my best friends, he refers to me as my financial advisor, because he's like, should I do this? Does this make sense? Should I sell? Should I buy? Um, and they were doing the trips, and that was always my answer. Yeah, you're going to drop 10,000 doing this, or you could put 10,000 into this so you're not working until you're 70. And it's hard to sway their mind because they've made up their mind they're going to go do that vacation regardless of what I say. But I was the oddball. I was the one that didn't do the vacations always, or I was the one that wanted to do a Groupon and go down to Austin for the weekend and that type of thing. And that's how I kind of built my group of friends. They knew it going into it. It wasn't like I'm like, oh hey, and by the way, I'm not going to go here, but I'm frugal. And that was important to me. I remember when I was dating in my 30s, I'm like, I would dive into finances real early, like maybe not on the first date, but the second date. And I think actually before I even met my husband, I think as we were texting, we were chatting about this and school debt and what's this and where he's at in his journey and what he wants to do. And that scared a lot of people away because it's an uncomfortable conversation that people don't like. And that's why there's not a lot of gay personal finance people out there, because it's just like, it's a topic that needs to happen, but people are uncomfortable having those conversations with them and calling people out on, like, I have a friend and he'll DM me constantly. And I'm like, you need to just stop job hopping and getting your hair certificate and doing this and doing this and doing this and just stick with one thing long enough to at least dig yourself out. Because I think that's what the messages are. I should have listened to you. I'm $30,000 in debt. I'm $40,000 in debt. I'm in this vicious cycle. I shouldn't have sold my place. The rent is outrageous here. And I can't sit there and say I told you so, but I can reiterate what I already said to them. Like, I told you not to sell this. This is what I would do right now if I were you, to try and dig yourself out. Because I think that's the other thing is sometimes, especially in the gay community, they'll dig themselves so deep that it's like, do I file bankruptcy? What are my options at this moment? Because it's overwhelming and I feel like I'm drowning.
Hmm.
And it's, you have to assess every situation and what makes sense. And I have seen this a lot. Some people don't want to put in that extra. Like, I worked at Ross when I racked up credit card debt because I just I wanted stuff when I got out of college. I'm like, oh, a DVD player. And I remember buying this $200 DVD player and all these things then. So I did rack up some debt. And then when I went to go get that third property, they're like, we're not going to loan you anything. They're like, you have no extra. So I think that was 2008, and I spent like a year at Ross on the weekends and evenings when I wasn't at the theater, and I would just take those checks from Ross and drive them over to Citibank and hand them to them every 2 weeks, and it took a year to pay off that debt, but it was worth it because it kept me going, and you have to look at it that way too. Is yeah, it's going to suck for a year, but it'll get me to where I want to be in the long term.
What do you say to a lot of people in probably their late 20s and 30s that think they're never going to be able to buy a house? That comes up a lot these days in the media.
It does, and I like to tell this story of a client that I had. He is a server in Los Angeles. He actually works two, kind of three server jobs, and he bought a condo, the cheapest condo he could find in Koreatown for 475,000, and it was a large, large one bedroom, and he IKEA curtained off the dining room, and he stays in the dining room and he rents out the bedroom. I think sometimes you have to make those sacrifices like he did to make it work, but I think that there is a way. And what is the lowest point of entry? And that's what I did when I got into Dallas. I just started taking those condos in the rougher areas that no one wanted, and I've sold off those condos and moved into the nicer neighborhood and nicer neighborhood and nicer neighborhood. And I know that some markets like Vancouver and New York and are super ridiculously expensive, but I know that there's got to be a lowest point of entry in that market that may be attainable if you save. And yes, you're living in the hood for a year or two, but then you sell it off and then you move into a nicer part. And that was what I did. And that was how it worked. And at the time when I was buying, that was a lot of money for me. And that's why I was selling on eBay, because I didn't make enough at the theater or at Ross when I worked there for a year for these down payments. So I would flip merchandise on eBay to save those down payments.
Which you still do. You're in your eBay room.
I'm in my eBay room. I do it passively more than actively. If it were up to my husband, it would all be thrown away. But at the end of the year, he's always happy with what came in and what went out. I don't actively source anymore, but he is the OCD package shipper, and he does fulfillment, is what we say. He is the fulfillment specialist. So it's still, there are some items that it makes sense, and that's what I say to him. Like, we sell this one makeup, we buy it for $1.50 and we sell it for $25.99.
Yeah.
It's easy.
That arbitrage is very easy. That math is simple, and you probably still like it, right? You consider it a
It's a hobby.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more of a hobby than a huge moneymaker. But I'm telling you, when I have those terrible real estate months, and thankfully I haven't had to put in 6 generators at once, but I have had roofs and furnaces and everything and foundation all in one month. It's nice when I have that extra $2,000 come in from eBay, just to keep everything afloat and keep everything comfortable.
It's perfectly fine to have hobbies if it's how you want to spend your time. Like, before we hit record on this, I literally put a number of tomato seedling plants outside to harden, because here in the Northeast, you have to put them outside for a little bit, so they can get used to the temperatures. And I probably could just buy tomatoes. It would be a lot cheaper, but I like growing them. So I choose to do that, right? Is it my highest and best use of time? Probably not, but it keeps me sane. I'll go for walks in the morning after I drop off my daughter sometimes. Like, I could probably do something else with that hour and change, but that's what I like to do. I want to zone into listening to music, look at people's gardens, walk around town, and then get some fresh air and come home. Like, I think it's part of like mental health. Like, maybe, eBay allows you to just kind of disconnect from everything else, make a little bit of cash on the side, have some fun selling some stuff. It's a challenge too, right? Like, you're like, oh, what can I buy and sell and have a good delta on that? I'm not going to make a fortune, betting on DraftKings during NFL football, but like, I put $500 in at the beginning of the year. It keeps me entertained for 17 weeks. If there's money at the end, then I did my job.
For sure. I totally understand that.
Yeah, we have to be balanced, right? A lot of times on these podcasts, we hear so much about kind of the entrepreneurship work that we're doing, how to drive money and drive revenue and highest and best use and hire everything out and 4-hour work week, and you name the business book that they're talking about. And that's all good and all, but we all need to have interests. I've noticed a lot of the bros and the entrepreneurs that are on their own real estate podcast, they're always about, doing like the, 75 fitness days or whatever the heck it is, and sitting in ice baths and, showing how, showing how
I just got an
masculine
ice
they are.
bath.
You
I just
did?
got an So this, I don't know
Did
if
you
I want
record
to.
it? Is it on Instagram? Because if it's not, it
No,
didn't happen.
it's not on Instagram, but it was a free. So this company approached me and they're like, "Hey, will you do this and be a brand ambassador and you'll get free items from Amazon?" And an ice bath showed up last week, and I was excited. But then I got a bird feeder with a camera yesterday, and that is actually the most exciting thing that I've gotten because it also identifies the birds, species, and the age and everything.
There is an inordinate amount of Instagram ads I get for bird feeder cameras, and I'm not sure why. Probably because I clicked on one once.
But mine was free, so that makes it
Yeah.
that much better when I get it. It's a cool company. But when you said ice bath, it instantly triggered my free ice bath. So we have inflated it, but not gotten in it yet. So there's been no ice baths yet, but I have an ice bath,
So
and
you're a
it
bit
just
of you're an influencer too, is what I'm hearing. Content creator
I
influencer, huh?
I but I don't give shouts on anything that one I wouldn't use. Like I do plug like the landlord insurance that I actually use because I use it and I feel comfortable. And that's always whenever I post anything, like I'm super excited about the bird feeder. So I posted about that and I'm like, wait, I'm gonna share some videos of my birds and what species they are and how old they are and all that kind of thing. Um, so I wouldn't say influencer as much as I'll endorse or a brand ambassador. That's,
Hmm.
I will plug things that I actually use. I say no all the time. They're like, "Will you tweet this for $250?" I'm like, "No, I would never say that to any like I don't want them to do that."
Right.
So it's not a money thing. And that's where I think some influencers get lost. They plug garbage that doesn't make sense and then they lose their followers' trust. And I don't want to do anything like that.
We got to talk offline. I got to figure out how to get some free bird feeders. Like, we have a pretty decent audience for this podcast, and they're not coming to us to pitch their bird feeders. But hey, if you're listening and you run a bird feeder company, I'm more than happy to receive that product and talk about it, even on the Real Estate Law podcast.
I mean, that's where we're at, we're in our 40s,
Hmm.
and bird like that gets me excited. Like I was talking with my husband about it, and I was trying this new bird seed, and I hate the squirrels. Like that's my enemy when they're trying to get in there. And he's like, "You're becoming an old man. Like I'm watching you become an old man with your hate for the squirrels and your love for the different birds." So
I,
yeah,
I mean, we're all becoming older when we, focus on. I get a lot of gardening stuff sent to me on Instagram now. Where it's like you're at Home Depot and suddenly your cart got filled by accident with plants, and you didn't know how that happened, but you're going to buy them anyway. Like, yeah, that's me.
I did that the
Um,
other day. At Lowe's, though. I was at Lowe's and I went in for paint remover and I walked out with like 8 different shrubs that are getting planted outside and a flowering thing. So
Yet
yeah,
you're still frugal, as the frugal gay.
for sure, for sure. But I think that people confuse cheap and frugal.
Hmm.
I will spend when it makes sense. I will take a good vacation. We will go to a good restaurant. Like I'll go and try and buy gift cards to save 20% when I get to that restaurant. But I think that there is a definite distinction between frugal and cheap. And
Hmm.
I hate when people just assume that I'm cheap and I wouldn't do this or I wouldn't buy that or I wouldn't tip properly. That is not the case.
Have you been to Provincetown yet? I got my Pride Away
I
Stay
have
shirt on.
I have not, but I
No.
have an
Okay.
offline story for you that I can
Okay.
tell you
All right. That
after.
will that will be the tea after the podcast, as they
Hmm.
say. All right, talk about coaching because you briefly alluded to the fact that your friends would ask you questions about this. You were kind of their, de facto financial advisor. At what point did you formalize that and say, maybe there's something here where I can actually get some money for this advice and change people's lives along the way?
I just was giving away so much free advice as I started to grow the Frugal Gay that I think when I was around 10,000 followers, I paid for a coaching session with one of my idols. His name is Jay Money. He's big in the financial, and I paid, and he's like, "You have too many followers not to do something. Like you're doing them a disservice by not offering something." And he's like, one, start valuing your time, and two, there's people that will pay you for exactly what you're giving right now, so start making some money off of it because you're already doing it.
Hmm.
And I tossed it up, and I remember when I got that first paid session, and the client's still with me, and he has 3 rental properties now, and it's a lot of hand holding for buying investments, looking at deals. Like, well, the session that I did yesterday, we just sat and analyzed 8 deals. And does this make sense? Would you buy this property? Would you not buy this property? And I typically stick with markets that I'm in. Those are the easier to coach in Ohio or Texas. Um, but a lot of times I wish I had that at the beginning, because the only metric I knew when I was buying real estate was 1% rule. Like that was the only thing that I didn't know. Like I knew nothing on cash on cash. Like people are like, what's your cash on cash? I'm like, what? So I wish I had some of that, because, and the other thing that I'm seeing as I'm doing coaching with the people is I can look at a listing and not even click through the pictures and say yes or no. And they're starting to, like, that's what I'm working on with them. So they're seeing the red flags, and they're seeing, oh, a flipper just flipped this 11 days ago and marked it up $100,000. There's no reason to even be wasting time looking at this type of property. And that happens a lot. And people don't scroll down and look at the price history. And they just, I helped a client bought a property up in Michigan. He made no money for 14 months. And then I helped him. I'm like, all right, it's time to just tap out, sell it, and get into a market where you can actually make money. And he's like, you taught me more in 50 minutes than I've learned from hours and hours of podcast, just by showing him some of the things and where he went wrong with this property that he bought. So I think that I would have loved it early on, because I was making mistakes. I made bad purchases. I got emotional over properties. I overpaid for properties. I skipped inspections that I shouldn't have. But that's what I offer. That's the long answer of that.
I think we've all been down that road, where we're kind of stuck in a certain way of seeing something, and then finally some different force comes from a different direction saying, well, why are you looking at it that way? Look at it this way instead. And it's that life-changing, tweak that you make, that suddenly you're making money on this thing that you've just been hitting your head against the wall for so long and not be able to make money on it. When somebody allows you to reframe what you're looking at, saying, well, do this instead, move your money into this other investment, like get out of that market, get out of that thing, and we all need that external voice sometimes. Sometimes we hear it from our spouses in our friend group, and you might need to have an independent person that's just like, hey, let me look at this for a second. No, you're not doing it correctly. And that's maybe where some of your clients are appreciating that little bit of advice that you're giving that is actually life changing.
For sure. And I think in that session, when they pay that money, that gives them a peace of mind that they're not stressing just having a second set of eyes is nice, especially with someone who's done 30, 40 deals at this point. It just gives me a little reassurance. And I'm in no way in the transaction, which I think sometimes realtors will be like, just do it, just do it, just do it. And I had a client, and the realtor was like pushing him to skip the inspection. I'm like, no, don't do it. And they were more worried about a commission than a right purchase for a first-time home buyer. And I hate when that you get into that situation where you have your friend as your realtor and they're saying, do it, do it, do it. But really, is it a financially responsible move? Or does it make sense to skip this $500 inspection? And having no interest in the purchase helps them, kind of reassures them.
Are your clients gay? Is that the focus?
The majority are not, but you mentioned the debt-free guys. They were clients early on, so they're actually house hacking now. So I've had, off and on over the years, definitely had a couple, but I've found my audience, I don't have a huge, it's not sexy to talk about frugalness or fixing up a radiator that I'm spray painting. So I don't have a huge gay clientele, but I do have quite a few gay followers.
It does feel like an untapped opportunity, as we continue on, in our life journeys. That there might, I mean, we opened up Pride Away Stays in Provincetown as a co-hosting company that's owned by LGBTQ plus people for that community. Oddly enough, our first couple clients were straight owners. But what we learned along the way is we talked to a lot of gay owners who probably just wanted to have another voice and another person to talk to that's doing the same thing. And I could certainly relate to that because we've been running our short-term rentals since 2016, but I really didn't have a network of people that I could tap into who was doing this until I joined the STR Secrets Mastermind in 2022. And then suddenly my world was opened up to lots of other people that you can sympathize with these people over the same things. You could talk about guests, talk about best practices, talk about technology, your tech stack, how to price, and have a conversation with a group of people that you have not been able to talk to because you couldn't find them. That's what we're kind of thinking in Provincetown with people that are doing short-term rentals. They don't want to talk to a big national company that don't understand Provincetown, and you're just another number of 30,000 properties instead of being a number of a small portfolio like we have. So that's what we're kind of judiciously growing in that town. But we know that sometimes gay people like to talk to other gays. That's why I thought maybe as people are awakened to the financial world they should be following, they might find people like yourself and say, hey, this guy has been building this for a couple decades. I could talk to him as a real estate investor. I could talk to him, and not be shamed into having a same sex partner, whatever it is. And maybe there's something there where the two could meet.
100%. And if it's okay with you, I want to share a quick short-term rental story.
Mm-hmm.
So I was working there this past week at my short-term rental. I love staying in it. It's a historic neighborhood. And like you were talking about walking around, I love walking around. So anyways, I do a tweet and I list out all the things. I've been doing it for a year now. And I list out all the things that have vanished over the past year. And it's all little petty things, but I have had like a book about my house disappeared, light bulbs disappeared, and it's a bunch of stuff. And it went crazy over on Twitter. And I get a message on Airbnb from Airbnb escalation support. And they're like, let's talk about the incident. And I'm like, how did you find me? Like, that was creepy. And they're like, do you want to block people or do you want us to go back, give us reservation numbers and we can charge them? And I'm like, no, because stuff trickles out over time and you have to replace silverware that gets thrown away and that. But some of the things were bugging me while I'm in the house and I'm having to go I'm like, I've had alarm clocks disappear twice now. Like, who is taking these I'm buying $8 Target alarm clocks, but they keep vanishing out the door sometimes after certain stays. And it was a tweet that really resonated with people because people either were like, this is terrible, or I always steal when I go to short-term rentals. And then it was big enough that it got the attention of Airbnb and they're like, hey, let's make this right. And I'm like, guys, it's like $100 worth of stuff. I'm not sitting here bad mouthing you because of it. It's just people pick up stuff and take it sometimes when they stay in your units. And I'm not trying to talk anyone out of short-term rentals, but it just happened this week. And it was just, when I did that, I had no idea that it would resonate how it did with my followers.
I mean, maybe having 74,000 followers on X/Twitter, helps. Their monitoring software probably filters out the people that don't have the audiences that you do, and maybe that's why they picked up on it. It's interesting though that you've had that experience. I'm not super aware of much theft that's happened at our properties. I'm sure there are some things that have been taken. Maybe we leave tons of cleaning supplies and toilet paper and paper towels and everything out because we want people to feel like it's their home, and we kind of trust people that they're not going to just steal everything. I don't think I've had a lot of
The
theft of
light bulbs
stuff
are
like that.
like, you had to take a globe off, take the light bulb out, and then put
That's
the
weird.
globe back on. That one is, yeah. So some of them are just bizarre.
I did have a cleaner. One of my cleaners thought that my steak knives were stolen and they were just missing. She couldn't find them, and I filed a claim. Had more steak knives shipped to the property. They were from Amazon Basics or Essentials. They weren't super
Mhm.
expensive, but you want to have steak knives if you're going to be cutting meat. You don't want a butter knife. And then I was at the property with her once and I was opening the dishwasher and I opened up the very, very, very top drawer. Like, this is a dishwasher, it actually has a silverware drawer in the very top, which is kind of a new thing.
Mhm.
And she looked at me and she's like, oh my God, I never knew that was there. I said, yeah, it's been here all along. She's like, that's probably where the steak knives were. So, it's sometimes things just get misplaced. I did have a paper towel holder disappear. No one knows why or where. But it's gone. So, we filed a claim.
I I did file I had all of my silverware except for the little spoons disappear.
Hmm.
And what was great was I was the guest before them and I was the guest after them. So there was no like, oh, maybe it went with this person or maybe it went with them. And yeah, I got reimbursed for those 15 missing pieces of silverware that accidentally left with them, but and they cannot stay there again.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
that was the outcome of Airbnb. I'm like, I don't want to chase anyone down for $2 light bulbs. Like, this
Right.
is just, I'm here working at the house and I'm just telling you what's missing and what I'm replacing.
We've had guests that have broken stuff, and
Yeah.
usually if they break stuff, they might say, "Oh my God, my son broke this thing, and I'd be like, don't worry about it, it was $30. Like, it's not
Yeah,
a big deal, it's decorative,
same.
right? I had some people throw a virtual reality controller through a TV by accident because they punched it, while they're playing the game, and they replaced the TV and then called me and let me know what happened. I was amused by the story. I kind of wish they called me beforehand, because I would have told them to get a TV with Roku built in, not the one that they got, just from an operational perspective. But I thank them very much. Our worst situation is one that we're going through right now, where a guest caused a significant damage to a house that we just built during a power outage. They ended up leaving um, on schedule, right? But like, we're on a well, so when the power came back on, for some reason they did not turn the faucet back closed. They had it open and they had the drain blocked, so the whole house flooded. Um, well over $100,000 worth of damage. We're undergoing the rebuild right now. So Serve Pro, which did the remediation, was 30K right there. The rebuild is going to be over 60. Lost income, which I'm covered on my insurance for that. But I did file a claim with Airbnb as well, because you have 14 days to do it. And I figured I had to do it, because if I didn't do it during those 14 days, I couldn't reopen that claim afterward. So just to protect myself, I had to do it, and if you look through air cover, they're basically not going to cover anything if your primary insurance is going to cover it. Like, you can't double dip, and they're going to
Mhm.
basically, be secondary to your homeowner's policy. So I went through the claims process with both my insurance company and Airbnb. Airbnb kind of didn't conclude anything, and I finally followed up with them a couple weeks ago. I was like, hey, this is still open, like, is there anything here? And they said, oh, well, since your homeowner's insurance is covering it, we're not going to cover any of that stuff. And then, which is the answer I was expecting, actually. So I didn't fight it, but I said, oh, but you guys should cover the deductible, right? I actually had $1,000 deductible, which was thank God it wasn't higher. And they covered that. Like, it wasn't even a question. It was like, no, you're right. Yeah, we should cover that deductible, because that was not covered by your policy. So they just sent me $1,000.
Any lost revenue? Do you get that from insurance? No.
So I work with a company called Proper Insurance.
Hmm.
It's a much higher um, premium that I pay, because they specialize in short-term rentals. So
Okay.
they're going to charge me more. Like, it's like, you're not hiding what you're doing. You fully disclose exactly what the property is, and you just pay a higher premium as a result. But it includes lost income coverage. I'd selected $50,000 worth of lost income coverage as my limit. So
Hmm.
what I'm learning this whole process as it comes. But what they do is they look at your bookings you had to cancel. They look at the dates that would have booked but hadn't booked yet. Based on your history, they figure out with
Hmm.
their formula how much each of those days is worth, and they just basically, as one of the components of your claim, they remit money as lost income right to your checking account. So, there's like
Okay.
a number of components to the claim. There's the rebuild, there's the remediation, there's the lost income, and then there's contents. We still haven't submitted a contents claim yet, because all my contents are kind of tucked away in the back corner while our builders are building, just so it doesn't get
Sure.
further damaged. But yeah, we're going through all that right now. So it's you learn
That
all this
doesn't
stuff
sound
as you.
fun.
It doesn't. It was shocking, when it happened, because this is a beautiful house that we built. We talked about on this podcast. It's doing fantastically. So it's just a minor setback, but we worked through it. So it's been a year, but on we go. These kind of things, they don't dissuade me. Put stuff in front of me and I'll find a way through. So
And that's how I do it as well. I mean, you
yeah,
just figure it out on the hard months. There are great
figure it
months,
out.
and then there are, yeah.
And if it's broken, you can find a way to fix it. You could throw money at
Hmm.
something, and eventually you might not, might realize you shouldn't throw more money toward whatever that problem is. But money fixes everything, money and time. So find the right people. What we do in the short-term rental world, I was just talking to some people last night about this, like with our co-hosting businesses, is that we solve stuff for people and we do it fast. So if hosts don't know who to call for it, and we're their co-host, we know who to call. We know who to contact. Pride Away Stays, individual hosts, they don't know how to get stuff done. We've seen it. We haven't seen everything, but we've seen it and done it. So we know who to call. We know how to solve it. And if we don't know how to solve it, we'll figure out how to solve it. That's kind of like what our value prop is. Just like you've done this stuff before. You've bought tons of properties. When people come to you say, how do I get my first one? Like, you've seen these situations. That's why you're entitled to coach.
For sure. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said if we haven't done it, we'll figure it out. It's hard sometimes. Like, I was trying to find window cleaners and no one would answer, no one would respond. I'd email, I'd text, I'd call, And finally someone called back and they came out and they gave me a price, and I thought it was a little bit high, but I wasn't going to argue because no one else will call or respond. So here's the job, and had them do it. And I think that that is key, because sometimes you need that fast response. You need someone to respond or acknowledge, and that's hard sometimes nowadays. Like, people just will not pick up their phone or return a call or return an email. So I think that there's a
Absolutely.
lot of value there.
There's a lot of value to getting stuff done and getting it done right now. Talking about the generators, and then we'll get into the final three questions that we ask all of our guests.
Sure.
I reached out to the company that I reached out to. They came out, they surveyed everything immediately. They gave me a quote immediately. They had time to get the installations done. The price was in the ballpark of what I expected to pay. I'm like, done. Let's get it done and move on. It's one less thing I have to think about. I'm not going to nickel and dime this conversation and try to save a little bit of money, try to save 10% by calling around to 5 different companies. I don't have time for that. Like, there's a lot of value to like just kind of pushing forward with that thing. So, that's advice from us. If you're listening to this and you kind of get paralyzed and you're thinking about, calling that 5th company for that 6th bid and the 7th thing, it's like, stop it. Like, what is your time worth? But make a decision to move on. Anyway, okay. Let's get on to the final. I could talk to you forever about this thing. So we'll have to have another Frugal Gay episode coming up in the Real Estate Law podcast. Yeah, with the actual attorney on the podcast too. We'll ask you some hard-hitting legal questions, as we always do. We don't.
Okay.
So these 3 questions have nothing to do with legal stuff, right? This is just a way to sum
good.
the interview up and just to get to know you a little bit better. First question: if you could get on stage for half an hour and talk about any subject in the world with zero preparation, what would it be?
I would have to lean into real estate and the power of starting at the bottom and working your way up, just because that's how I did it. And I could, that's always my answer. If I started over again today and I had no money, I had nothing, I would start with the cheapest point of entry in Dallas, which is now not 15,000, but 150,000. And I'd work my way up, and I'd start it, if I had to start it as a server or a restaurant, wherever I'd have to start, because I think that gets overlooked. But that's a topic I can just talk about for hours.
Second question: tell us something that happened early in your life or career that impacts the way you're working today.
Something that happened early in my career that impacts the way that I am today. I was raised with the, if you want it, you're going to have to work for it mentality. And I also, when I was started buying real estate in Dallas, I was always outbid or overlooked, or when I remember the investors looking at me like I'm an idiot because I'm wearing flip-flops. And I think that impacts me today. Like, I still show up in flip-flops. I am not here to try and impress anyone. I am here to get the job done. And I think that delivering a great product, regardless of me wearing flip-flops or not, is what I like to do. And that is how I always look at it. I'm not trying to impress anyone. I don't want to look rich. I want to have a good life. I want to do that. And that has definitely impacted me over the years.
You should write a book. You're happy in flip-flops, right?
Happy in flip-flops. Leave me alone. No.
Final question: tell us something you're listening to or watching or reading these days. Anything in the world.
Oh, this is almost embarrassing. I was watching The Circle with my husband on Netflix right now, and it's the most awful show ever. And I asked him if we could stop, and he said it's like a car crash. You got to finish. You want to see the end. And that is not going to motivate anyone to watch The Circle, so I can't even plug that. I just read a real estate book, and I can't remember the title of it. But it was good. It was good. I try and do a book a month, and this was a gentleman that follows me on Twitter, and he's like, "Hey, will you read my book?" And I'm like, "Sure, send it." And it was very well written. What I see with personal finance, and I'm sure as you do as well, it gets very repetitive. So a lot of times I'm halfway in, and because a lot of the concepts are the same, but I like when there's a different voice. And that's why one of the books that I read this year, I was telling you before, was Tipped, and it came from a tipped worker who was able to build wealth. And she was a stripper, and it had, even though it was the same concepts, it was a fun story to read, because I got into it because of her backstory and the way she told it, because she didn't hold back, and she called out the bad patrons or the people that stiffed her after she'd do certain work. And I loved the story. So that was, I would definitely plug Tipped. I read that one back in December though.
Tipped in the Circle.
Yeah,
I've done previous seasons of the Circle. I don't know if I could do it again, but
it
yeah.
save your time.
All right. So how could people get a hold of you, Tom, if they want to learn more about your work as the Frugal Gay?
I'm at thefrugalgay.com. I'm at thefrugalgay11 on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, or X. I'm most active on X, but I try and sometimes I forget I have Instagram, and I try and get over there at least once a day and share my story over there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's how I found you on Instagram. So we're not super active on X, but you know, your following is really big there. So clearly you are.
I connected over there. That one kind of took off.
Yeah. If you want to get on this podcast, please go to realestatelaw.podcast.com, fill out our form, let us know what your story is, what your background is, and we'll get back to you if we think it's a good fit to appear on the podcast. If you want to give us a review, we love 5-star reviews, and we read all your comments and messages, so please go ahead and reach out to us. Tom, thank you so much for joining us here on the Real Estate Law Podcast. It's been a pleasure to get to know you. I look forward to having another conversation in the future, and you know, continued success with that next property and many more to come.
Thank you for having me.